Welcome to Software Sales Simplified, Move to Success, weekly podcast for software sales professionals who want to sell better. Whether you're a seasoned pro or just starting out, make our podcast your home for insights, developments, and news from the world of enterprise software sales. My name is Kevin Donville. I am being joined today by my illustrious colleague and good friend, Matt Long. How you doing today, Matt? How's your week been?
I'm doing great, Kevin. Thank you.
Fantastic. Good to hear. Matt and I have over combined 50 years of experience in software enterprise sales, services, and deployment. And we're happy to be here with you today and with our guest. Matt, quick question for you. Have you ever had someone try to teach you something and they clearly knew less about the subject than you did? Has that ever happened to you?
Does that count the last time you tried to teach me something?
Oh, walked right into that.
It has happened before. I will you not being included in that conversation. But
That's totally fine. But yes, it's a very frustrating thing. And having had a little bit of experience on the world of being able to teach people sales and software and all kinds of things related to that, it can be very, very frustrating. And to talk about how to do that right and be more successful out in the workplace, we've brought on a very special guest with us today, Meredith Golden. Meredith, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm glad to be here.
Well, it's really great to have you. Now, Matt and I have had the privilege of working with you before, and you right now are leading enablement at the organization that you're at right now, which is called Aircall. Is that correct?
Yes, I'm leading the sales enablement in particular. We have a little bit of a surrounding enablement org with us, but I'm leading the charge with everything sales related.
Absolutely. And that's an important distinction, right? Between just general enablement and sales enablement are two very, very different things. And a lot of organizations, unfortunately, end up kind of munging the two of them together. I worked with you in that capacity before, so I'm very familiar with your credentials and your expertise. Matt is as well. But if you would be so kind, share a little bit of that with our listeners. Take a moment, take the floor, and kind of tell everybody who you are, what you do, and where you do it.
Of course. I like to say that I do enablement now, but really at heart, I'm a salesperson. I was in the field for over 10 years in various sales roles and capacity before I moved into enablement. I actually started out more in traditional sales, like enterprise rent-a-car and phone sales sort of approach, but I moved into the tech world about 8 years ago now, and I joined as an SDR because it was my first entry into software sales, and it was a totally different motion and a completely new world for me. So I wanted to get a really good foundation first before I was given a huge book of business and expected to go sell. I moved up into the AE role though, within a year, I moved up into that enterprise AE position and spent about 4 years in the field at our last company together, where I was really part of a foundational sales team, like really exploring the region for the first time, kind of in an unproven market, and learned a lot while I was out there. But I made the transition to enablement because I felt in my role as a seller very underserved by the training that we'd receive or the material that was produced. And I felt that it was really important to have a sales perspective more upstream in that development and in that like strategic positioning. So that's why I made the transition.
That's interesting. That's not an atypical path that a lot of folks take, especially if you're in the sales engineering role that Matt and I come from. It's a pretty common one, but to go from SDR to rep to going off into the sales enablement world, is that a common path that you've seen other people taking?
I think it's less common than I realized at the time. And honestly, I think historically, enablement maybe has a connotation of where sellers go to die. Like, it's not always been seen as the place where really high performers go because they want to stay at seat. They want to be, making that commission. For me, I felt like my time as a rep was limited. I didn't see myself as an AE like in my future career. And I also didn't see myself moving into a sales manager role. It just wasn't calling to me in the same way that enablement was. And
Yeah. Yep.
sorry, go ahead, Matt.
No, I was just going to say, a lot of people step into a sales management role because they do want to kind of coach and manage a team. But enablement's a little bit different. There's an education and teaching component to that can be fulfilled with sales management, but there's so much more in sales management. A lot of times it just gets down to tell me your forecast. Is the deal coming in? Which is not the same thing, right?
No, but you're exactly right. I mean, the coaching aspect is what was really calling to me. And it's what I've always been drawn to. Even as a seller, we were, constantly sharing best practices and sharing new tactics with each other. And I always had such satisfaction when I'd see something work for another one of my teammates. And the reality is, sales managers are expected to do a lot of coaching. But like you said, there's so much that they're inundated with that they rarely have the time. And it is the first thing to be dropped off of their to-do list. So I think enablement can actually play a really strong role, especially if you're really aligned with your sales leaders and what they're trying to accomplish. Then you can take on that role of coaching the reps and have just as much of an impact, if not even more of an impact in that skill development than a frontline manager might.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, the analogy I think I would use is the difference between approaching the problem or the challenge or the value that sales enablement is trying to deliver. It's like the difference between being a handyman and being an architect or a carpenter, right? The manager is trying to, in the moment, as a byproduct of what they're doing on a day-to-day basis, try to instill better best practices and execution. When you're in sales enablement, you're on the hook for delivering that, tracking its effectiveness, and really building a plan and a program that's going to last for much, much longer, right?
Yeah, exactly. And if you don't have the ability to kind of see the bigger picture and see how that program is affecting the sales team and affecting the sales managers, then kind of setting yourself up to fail right from the get-go. So having that experience and that wherewithal, like the understanding of the sales org and that perspective of your actual end audience, I think is truly valuable.
Now, you were a pretty high performing salesperson, as you said. I mean, you set a lot of records. You made a lot of thresholds. Was there a person inside of sales, the leadership, or inside the organization in general that was supportive of what you were trying to do, or was there a little bit of pushback when you said you wanted to make the change?
It's funny you ask because I kind of had two different approaches or two different reactions to it. When I first posed the potential to move over to enablement, it was actually something I was developing before we had an enablement team. So at the time, the company had kind of that startup culture of like, you see a problem, create a case and solve it. And I was kind of in the midst of creating a case that we need an enablement team and we need a department to better support our sales org. And that's when they hired our VP of revenue operations and enablement. And I immediately went to him and I said, hey, I want to join your team. I'm really eager. There's all these problems. And he immediately was like, great, I'm 2 days in. Give me some time. Like, yeah, we're not going to fix everything right off the bat. Like, got to get my feet wet. We need some like real enablement professionals as well. So come back to me in a year and let's see where things are. Within that year, I had my best year as a seller. I, outperformed my team. I think I was the highest performer on the East Coast at the time. And then we had a transition of our sales leadership. And our sales leaders came in and sat down with me because, they kind of wanted to hear from some top performers. And when I said that I was interested in moving into enablement or into a different type of supporting coaching role, he was extremely supportive of that move because he had very intensive hiring plans coming up. And from his perspective, he wanted someone who had been in seat and successful selling exactly what it is we're selling in order to train these new hires that are coming in. So he was really supportive. And my direct managers as well at that time were really eager to see me move into a role that they knew I was gunning for over a year. So at that point, and of course, our VP of RevOps had gotten his feet wet. He had a couple other team members on board by then, and they were for, a little bit of growth and expansion. So the timing actually worked out really well.
That's outstanding. And yeah, I was on the periphery for a lot of those conversations inside the organization, and you were very well respected as a seller. And the perspective of having someone with your chops getting into the sales enablement space definitely was resonating with a lot of folks inside of the organization. But why do you think that is the case? Why do you think that? Because I personally have a very strong opinion on it. I think that people have, if you're going to be in sales enablement, you have to have walked the walk.
Yeah.
Why do you think that that is? What's your personal opinion on that? And why do you think that good sellers make great enablers?
I think part of it, I mean, if we're being honest, the first part is just the credibility that it lends you with your audience. Salespeople are tricky at times. And in order to sell to a seller, you need to be a good seller. Some people would argue that salespeople are the easiest to sell to. That has not been my experience in the past. And ultimately, when you're creating enablement, you're trying to sell them on a new motion, on a new behavior, on a new technique, on a new process. So you really have to go at it with that kind of attitude that a salesperson might have. The second part is just that being in that role and really understanding all the nuances of what they're tasked to do, it goes much farther than just, you know, hitting your quota and running deals or having discovery meetings. Like there's so much minutia that goes into the AE's role that's not understood a lot of times from outside of the revenue org. And a lot of times the enablement isn't always in the revenue org. It might be training or programs coming out of product or product marketing or field marketing. And without, again, that seller's perspective, a lot of times it's just not meeting the field where they are. And so having that understanding to translate it kind of into the seller's, what is the word I'm looking for? Translate it into the seller's language is just a necessary part of launching a training program.
Yeah, and I think that's a rarity though, because usually top sellers don't go into enablement, right? And it's been very rare that I've actually had real salespeople that have walked the walk giving enablement. Now, that being said, Kevin, you kind of asked the question I jokingly answered. Did anyone try to teach you something that you knew less than you? All the time. I mean, it's like, just because you are a good seller or good in a certain area doesn't mean that you're a good trainer or a teacher. We've seen that time and time again when top salespeople get promoted to a management role and they're horrible, right? It's like they
That's
don't, different skill set. They have the knowledge, but they don't know how to apply it differently to their team to get the best out of each individual person, et cetera, right? So, I've been in cases where, you can learn a lot from someone who's articulate, well-trained, and knows how to deliver information in a structured format that people can understand. Having someone who's actually walked the walk and can fill in all the nuances and all the subtleties of a sales process, that's gold right there. No pun intended. But but it's like that is really a rarity. But I think that's when it's ideal, right? But I think there's benefits to both sides when you look at it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Like by all means, I'm not saying that you have to be a top seller to be a strong enabler. I've seen other folks come in and really understand the org and be able to launch programs. But at the same time, I think having that experience just lends you that extra set of credibility, and it might shorten the time it takes for you to actually demonstrate value to your audience if you know what it is they're really looking for.
And do you feel like your experience having several different positions in sales also helped you in enablement?
Oh yeah. There's clear differences in what an SDR or BDR might need as opposed to an AE, as opposed to a solutions engineer, as opposed to a CSM. And even having the AE's perspective and being an audience member before stepping behind the scenes, kind of by understanding what actually matters to those different roles, it's a lot easier to streamline the actual content development and say, this belongs with this audience, this belongs with that audience, this needs to go to everyone. But I think having as much role specific tailoring as possible also helps that material then land with your end audience. Again, just having that a little bit of that experience helps to make those adjustments as necessary.
Right. And when you don't have that experience, then is it incumbent upon the enablement team to talk to some key personnel in each of those roles, right? Just to really understand what's going, because I'm not seeing that a whole lot. I do feel like a lot of my training has been pretty, not generic, but just universally across the board. This is how to sell. But like you said, there's what you need to know at each role is so different. So how do you mitigate that when you don't have the experience?
If you don't have the experience, you really have to rely on your stakeholders, on your audience to be part of the content development or the program development. Ultimately, I think that should always be part of the process of any sort of initiative you're putting forward. You need to have the right buy-in from your senior stakeholders and executives that we're focusing on programs that are going to move the needle. But then you also need to have the buy-in from the people that you're trying to affect their behaviors. Because if you don't have their buy-in, introducing change to an audience that's not ready or prepared or willing to accept it is going to completely derail any program that you're trying to launch. And so if you don't have the experience, it is even more critical to get that understanding from, your BDR manager or your, frontline managers that are in the thick of things every single day to make sure that you're going to meet the field where they are and that you're going to integrate into the systems the way that they're using them today.
So you're talking about things that can really get in the way. If you don't take those steps as you just and done the foundational work and the research up front, your enablement program can really falter. Are there other pitfalls that you see that can really get in the way of getting that enablement program launched quickly and effectively?
Yeah, I think, like we just said, making sure that you're integrating any training into the daily operations of the team, whether that's a system or a tool that they're using. If they're not able to adopt your training, then they're not going to use your training. So that's the first part. You have to have an action plan of how this will be really implemented into the team. The other, kind of taking a step back again, one of the bigger areas I see is setting the right expectations with your stakeholders from the very beginning, both in the field and the senior execs that you're trying to get their buy-in and alignment with. A lot of times I see enablement, and I act in this way. We're a facilitator between what's happening in the field and what the executives are seeing. They might come in expecting huge advances on, our MRR, ARR, or reducing our deal time to close, or whatever, of those key leading metrics are that they're looking at from the top down. The reality of it is we can say we're going to try and impact all of these metrics, but if we don't have an understanding of the leading indicators, like the behavioral changes that we're trying to affect first, then there's no real way to then tie it to those overarching KPIs that we're trying to manage from the top down.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. So if that's the case, so like you're sitting there setting those expectations with leadership, what happens if leadership in the field are not on the same page? How does that affect your ability to build and launch a successful enablement program?
It's always a push and pull, I would say. There's always going to be executive priorities, top-down priorities that the org wants to achieve. Our job in enablement is to see those priorities actioned and improve those high-level metrics that we're looking at. And part of our job is also to recommend the best plan to do so. So as an enablement leader or manager, you really need to be conscious about the programming, like the different types of programming that you can provide. It's not just like run a training program for 45 minutes and then call it a day. That's not enablement in my mind. It's much more involved. And you really, I'm trying to make this connection, but by being able to tie in what's happening in the field back to the executives. Sorry, I'm losing my train of thought here, but it's
It's okay. We've been doing this for a while. It's so easy to happen, and then you suddenly realize I'm halfway through my answer and I don't remember the point I was going to make.
Yeah, I'm like, I don't know where I was going with this, but I had I had a point and it just like floated right out of my head.
Well, let me ask you a question, I think related. Maybe this will tie it back in. But um, when you're looking at enablement, there's a bunch of different types, right? There's a new seller coming on board needs to be enabled. And that's what we mostly think of, right? Is that, right? How do you get someone up to speed as quick as possible on the product so they can be effective in the field? And then you have the product releases that are coming out, and then you have to train the team on that. That's usually like a 40-minute session. All in there, you get 3 minutes to ask questions, and then here's the material, go sell it, right? Which is not a thing. So I think there's a balance, and then there's just the ongoing. How do you continue to refine your skills, whether it be product or market focused or just sales in general, right? So enablement to me is just so interesting because it touches so many aspects of professional development and success. Where do you spend most of your time, or have you seen the most success or how do you kind of put all these things together, I should say, into a successful program?
It's a good question. And I'd say it probably depends first off on how the team is set up. Like if you have, like we talked about before, kind of the surrounding enablement roles to lead product enablement or to lead an onboarding program. Like a lot of times there's a dedicated onboarding specialist on an enablement team. So some of that responsibility may be divvied up. And especially if you're an enablement leader, like that's an important aspect to think about the roles on your team and what like competencies you need and what areas you really need to focus on in order to like fill those roles on your team. But if you are kind of either a solo enabler or you're on a team that's role specific, you've kind of got your hands in all the different pies. You're working with product to translate it for sales enablement. You're working with product marketing or field marketing to drive some, additional inbound lead generation and things like that. So for me, it's really important to always be connected with your sales leaders and their priorities, and to ensure that what you're prioritizing or programming is going to align with them. Because ultimately most of the time, if your, enablement team's under product marketing or under a customer education org or something, you might have different senior stakeholders. But for the most part, I'd say most enablement folks report at least some way up to a chief revenue officer. And ultimately, their needs and priorities are what you're serving or what you're focusing on. So whether it's product related or skills related, sometimes you're the one that has to delineate the two and say, we're not doing good discovery, but it's not because they don't know the product. It's because we haven't given them enough skills training on it. We haven't focused enough on our value orientation around it. So let's focus on that aspect and not so much on the product training. So it's up to you to kind of be prescriptive and identify what those necessary interventions might look like.
It's interesting that you said it rolls up to the CRO, and I guess it's sales enablement. So yeah, that makes sense. But I'm also thinking of product, so the product person also is in charge. Is that a separate track, or is that also rolled into sales enablement?
That also depends on the org. Sometimes, like the product enablement team is living in the product org. For us, we're actually on the same team, but we handle things quite differently. So, like our product enablement manager, for example, does all of our product training, including our customer facing training as well, like our customer education portal.
Mm-hmm.
So, sometimes, again, depending on the org, your product enablers or your technical enablement team might be more focused on solutions engineering or the support org. So it really just depends on how the company and the team is ultimately set up.
Yeah, it's interesting that you said that because I could think for our product marketing that I've experienced in the past, a lot of times it's just kind of a feature dump, right? It's like, here you go. But it's like no positioning on how this is valuable or how you're going to use this in your next sales cycle. And that sort of filters out over time. And then you have sales meetings where you're trying to figure it out and stuff like that. So it makes sense to me that if we were under one org, you'd always have that sales. How are we going to apply this to the market? Not just what does it do, but what is the value of this that we can actually drive forward to win business.
Yeah, I think if it's not part of that development process, it certainly should be. And I'll be honest, like I've seen it not be part of it. And that's when the training falls flat, like in the field when they come out and they do a big feature dump and the reps are left wondering, okay, what's the positioning? What's the use case? What is the problem that I'm solving? So for me, if that's something that I'm not a part of that development, if I'm an audience member, let's say, but I realize that this is the material that's hitting my team that I'm supporting from a sales enablement perspective, then it does become my job to go in and intervene because what they're delivering is not meeting the requirements for the team that I'm supporting. So in those cases, it might become necessary to step in and involve yourself, let's say, if they're not proactively involving you in that process. But I think it's all about how you approach it. You're not trying to call their baby ugly. You're trying to help them ensure that their material is resonating with their audience because they're going to be held to the same metrics that we are and that the field is. They're going to be held to their product attach rates and their ultimate revenue that they're impacting and driving as well from the marketing side. So we all ultimately want the same things. It's just a matter of how it's being delivered.
Yeah, these days with delivery is an important thing, right? And to your point about being aligned with what the sales leadership wants you to do and what needles they want to move, and how that can cause some friction if that does not align with where product marketing maybe is coming in with their views of how to articulate value, how to articulate positioning. And then,
Mhm.
from being a seller, you're in that unique position of knowing that's not how you would want to say it. I get your value that you're
Yeah.
telling me, but let me translate this into sales speak. Have you had experiences before where that reaching across the aisle has been challenging? And if so, how did you address that without
Yeah.
naming names?
Yeah. It's, I think the biggest challenge, maybe not the biggest, but the more reactionary like times that it comes up is when we're at deadline
Mm,
and we're launching this training tomorrow and we come in and say, hey, this isn't going to resonate. Well, I've just spent 2 weeks putting this whole training together. You're coming in at the last minute. What do you expect me to do? I'm not going to stay up all night. So it's all about the timing and like making sure that you're part, again, I feel like I'm repeating myself a bit, but like being part of the development process and not
mm,
just rollout, I think is really critical. And that's where I think a lot of times, oh, we're looping them in as we're ready to launch the training. So we did our job, we looped in enablement. No, we need to be in much earlier in that process. And so that what you're developing for the training is going to meet my expectations and the expectations of our audience. So the biggest recommendation I can give is to just get in there as early as possible, but that may not always work out. So it's a little bit trial and error. You can't always expect that it's going to go perfect the first time. So take your learnings if the training goes off the rails or it doesn't meet your expectations and figure out how you can improve it the next time. That's the only thing you can do going forward. And that's what you should be doing all the time anyway.
yeah, wholeheartedly agree. So from that perspective, I know that you got a lot of tricks in your bag that you use for being able to track that effectiveness. One of the ones that a lot of people are using these days, both as a learner and as a teacher, is artificial intelligence AI tools.
Mhm.
Everybody seems to be using it across the board to accelerate everything these days. How is that helping or hindering the enablement effort? And what are your tactics in that scenario?
I think there's time and a place for AI to be used. I think as much as it can be used from an automation standpoint, like automating workflows or tasks that are really mundane and that aren't really a value add to your day, but need to get done. It's part of the process. You got to do it. Sure, let's figure out how we can automate some of that or use AI to do some of this. Where I see it becoming too much of a crutch is when we're using AI to replace something like coaching or deal reviews. or even forecasting in an extreme example. But there's I'll give you one specific example to use. So AI scorecards, all scorecards are very popular now, whether it's Gong, whether it's Attention, like any number of tools have this ability. But what happens when we are relying on the AI to generate a score for all of our reps' cards, and the managers then aren't reviewing the calls? They're not involved in the deals. They're just looking at the scores and saying, great, this rep is doing wonderful. This rep is doing not so good. So let me focus on this rep without realizing that AI is often generating a lot of false positives or false negatives, and it's not really that reliable just yet. And more so, I'm seeing even reps rely on AI to do the account research, to fill in their Salesforce fields, even that like automation workflow that we're talking about. But then when they're asked a question about their deal, they don't know it well enough to talk about.
Exactly. Yeah.
So you can't use AI to replace your expertise and your ownership of your opportunity and of your territory and of your team as a sales manager. That's not what AI is meant to replace. It's meant to enhance and it's meant to ease all of that process. But if you rely on it too much, you're setting yourself up for failure.
Yeah, I think one of the tenets I always had with, computers or AI or anything is like, what are they good at? They're good at processing large amount of information, distilling it down for you, right? And I could see where if you have all these calls recorded from an enablement perspective, being able to go look at across all those and understand where are the gaps, what are missing, what are they misspeaking about, where are the missed opportunities, and then rolling that into your enablement program would be super valuable.
Yeah.
But then you get to the next level where it's like, well, let's create the content. We'll use AI to help us create the content, and then get a little bit more, touchy ground, because, or not as firm footing, right? Because it's like you don't know what it's spitting out there, so it can help you some things, but some scrutiny. So I imagine, are there other areas where you find AI super valuable, and other areas you just need to watch out for, other than the scorecards that you mentioned?
Yeah, I would say one of my favorite AI tools that I've just recently started using is Gamma. It's a
Mm.
deck creation, which is great for me because I love things to be visually intriguing, visually interesting, but I'm not a design professional. I'm really bad at it. Like I can put colored bubbles on a slide all you want. That's about as far as I will go personally. So having something like Gamma is really useful because I'm giving the prompt, I'm giving the content, and I'm saying this is how I want it stylized. This is what I want on the slide. The difference is that I have to become a subject matter expert in whatever it is that I'm giving to Gamma. You can't rely on AI to generate the content and then generate the deck, because then when you go to deliver, you are no longer the expert in what you're delivering. You're just using AI generated content.
Right.
And you will lose credibility as an enablement professional very quickly with your audience if they start to see like you don't know what you're talking about, you don't know our product, you're just copying and pasting our HighSpot or Confluence pages into GPT and using that as a summary. That's just not going to cut it if you really want to make a difference, in my opinion.
This deal has 6 fingers on it.
Right. But and even having the ability to review, the end results and be able to say, well, this isn't accurate. This is accurate. I want to double down on this. There's only so much you can rely on the AI.
How much of your experience as a seller do you think really comes into play there? Like kind of bringing us back to one of the original subjects we were talking about in our session today. How much about being a seller who's been in the field, having to make the message, do you think factors into your credibility as you're redesigning the stuff that's coming out of AI? How much of that comes into play, do you think?
Are you asking, how does my experience as a seller improve my use of AI editing and prompting?
Well, no, your ability to take messaging, AI happens to factor into this, but like you're taking that stuff out of Confluence. You're taking the stuff off the shelf that's been given to you, as opposed to being a person who's an education-based sales enablement person, right? You don't know the product, you don't know the space or the industry, but you're an educator. So now
Yeah.
you're taking all these assets and you're putting them out there. In your case, you're a salesperson, so you can apply that eye and that filter.
Mhm.
But I'm also adding the concept of and now it's being filtered and manipulated by AI. How much of your ability to be the salesperson in the room, looking at that critically, do you think factors into making really good content then when you're using AI tools?
I think it factors in the same way that it would factor as if you were looking at an opportunity, kind of like reviewing it and saying, what am I missing? What is going to prevent this deal from closing? And being able to take a step back and see the bigger picture and be able to identify what's missing, I
Mm,
think is a really key piece. Because AI, whether you're using GPT or Gemini, it's only going off of what you're feeding it. So
right.
how can it tell you what you're missing? Unless you also give that context of everything you need, which like people aren't doing, like realistically. So being able to step back and see the gaps, I think is something that AI isn't going to help you with as much as that natural sort of sales acumen might from the experience of working the deals, of meeting with customers and speaking with executives and really understanding what gets a deal from A to B, what will get this training from A to B. Like, I don't know if that's making sense, but I think just seeing the holes is where I would say.
Yeah, that ability to critically look at it, I think, is key. There's no substitute for experience at the end of the day, because that's the acid test that you can apply based on what you know does and does not work in the field. And AI hasn't really worked on an algorithm for that yet, to the best of my knowledge.
Well, I
So
mean, one of my favorite prompts now is, what am I missing from this? What have
okay.
I forgotten? Right? Asking
Mm,
the AI that and just see what it comes up with, because sometimes it really finds some things that's, oh, yeah, I need that. But you need to ask. It's not going to tell you. Right? It's like, so again, it's having that critical thinking of just why is this, or what else could this
Yeah.
be, or what does that mean, right? I think those are sales skills, right, that are really invaluable across all aspects of life, but even with your AI prompting chats.
Yeah. And I mean, the prompts in the chat will only have as much context as you give it, too.
Mhm.
exactly.
So, how much context can you really load up into the GPT? A lot, but enough? I don't know. We'll see.
Well, that's where being good steward and designer from the concept of you knowing what has to happen from being
Mhm.
having that experience factors into the quality, because it's garbage in, it's garbage out. But if you're putting in good factual perspective on the front end, like you're saying, end product is going to be better because the AI's got much better content to work with.
Yeah. And maybe it's my engineering, it's my prompts. I'm not a good GPT prompter, I'll be honest, but that's something for me to work on in the future.
Yeah, I don't think you need to necessarily be an expert. I think the career path that you've walked inherently gives you an interesting perspective from that. So I think that when you're asking the questions from any tool that you're using, you're asking those questions, I think, from a very healthy and constructive perspective for the people you're going to turn around and enable. So I applaud your approach. I think it's a smart one. You've had a very interesting career, very interesting path, and there may be some folks that are listening to our episode today or are going, you know what, that may be the next big thing for me. I think
Mhm.
maybe going into sales enablement might be exactly what I need. If someone was going to go do that today and they were in the chairs that you've been in the past, what advice would you give them?
I would say the first thing you need to do is understand where the company's priorities lie. And the reason I say that is because a lot of times for people I've spoken to who have made the transition from the field into enablement, myself included, a lot of times we go into it thinking about how I would want my role to be set up. What would that perfect world look like? What
Mm,
are all these functional pains that are getting me down that I want to fix? I want to take on this project. Ultimately, a lot of that is not highly impactful work. If you go in trying to solve all of the functional pains,
mm.
you overload yourself with too much to do with not enough impact. And our job as an enablement professional is to have and drive the biggest impact possible. So you really have to understand how business priorities translate into, I feel like I'm going down the value pyramid, but you have to understand how those business priorities translate into the initiatives and what programs that you can support those initiatives through so that you're always aligning with the corporate objectives. That's really understanding that value thread, I think, is really critical to being a successful enablement professional. Outside of that, one thing to lean on, like from your field experience, is discovery.
Mm.
Every time you're scoping a project, you're conducting discovery. And it's such a crucial skill that I see underutilized with like internal teams. Like we always talk about discovery with external customers, but we don't really talk about it in internal projects and scoping. And it is such a crucial part of the project development to make sure that you have all of the right things that you need outlined and that you're going to put forward a program that can meet, like we were talking about earlier, meet the expectations and set the proper expectations with your stakeholders. So lean on your discovery and understand the value thread. That would be my two recommendations.
Great skills to be developing. They're going to be useful in all kinds of contexts as you go forward. I could not agree with you more. And having been sitting second chair with you in a few of those conversations in organizations, I can say that your skills are probably second to none with respect to being able to get to the bottom of the mystery. What do we need to solve? How do we need to solve it? Why do we need to solve it? Always a very interesting conversation when you're engaged.
Yeah.
Meredith? What was that?
Especially internally.
Oh, yeah, especially, and probably I'd say more. That's a very interesting observation that you made, and I think it's poignant. And I kind of want to double down on that or double click on it, as people say
Yeah.
these days. Your observation is keen in the sense that you are solving a problem for the organization. That's why sales enablement is there. It's to make the sellers more effective. And taking the tactics that you use when you're trying to understand what the customer is trying to achieve and applying that internally to your own organization, I think is a key observation and a key tactic anyone should be using in any strategic role inside of the organization. So hats off to you for that observation. So if I were going to sum up what your pearls of wisdom in today's session, definitely I'd say that is right up there at the top of the list. That plus making sure that you're aligned with the executives, so that you are attacking the things that they want to be able to attack as quickly as possible and reaching across the aisle to the folks that are leading the effort on other sides and doing that early and often. I could not agree with you more. I think that those are fantastic pearls of wisdom, and I'm very happy that you shared them with our audience today. Meredith, we do need to wrap up. I would love to keep chatting, and we probably will after this because we always do tend to find an opportunity to chat. But I did want to say thank you to you for coming on. It was fantastic to get this perspective. To your point, not a lot of people have done this. And it was wonderful to hear your journey, your perspective, and your observations in how to make your role more successful for folks. Thanks again for being on here. It's always great to talk with you, my friend. Anything you'd like to share before we wrap up?
Not other than it's been really interesting to me. I've never been on the enablement team per se. I've been on the receiving end of it a lot, and so it's interesting to kind of delve into this and just hear, I think, a really critical and underappreciated role across a lot of organizations. But I think one that's getting more eyes on it and more awareness across teams as to how critical this is to your success and your GTM motion. So thank you for coming on and sharing that with us.
Thank you for having me. It's been very wonderful to chat with you both.
Meredith, if people want to reach out and connect with you, what's the best way for them to reach you? If someone is like pursuing this career path or is looking for some advice and wants to collaborate with another enablement leader, how would they reach you?
You can reach me on LinkedIn. Meredith Golden at Aircall is where you can find me. And my user link is Golden Meredith, if that helps at all. But you can always feel free to connect I accept almost everybody that reaches out. So it'd be wonderful to expand that.
And we'll certainly put that in the description of our episode. So, folks, if you want to reach out to Meredith, please do so. She's wonderful to chat with. I can speak to that wholeheartedly. But that does bring us to the end of our episode. We want to thank you all for coming in and spending a little bit of time with us. And once again, thanking our guest for having her come in and spend time with us. If you would like, please go to our website, take a look at some of the services we have to offer, or buy our book and share where we share our methodology with you. But with that having been said, thank you very much for coming in. Come back and join us again here next week. And until then, be well.